Campers, it's me, Ari Lehman, the first Jason Voorhees. From Friday the 13th, I'm here with AJ, and he's got the juiciest slice ready for you. It's dripping with blood. Jason never dies.
What makes a horror film kill memorable, terrific, even in some way profound or poignant? Let's explore. Thanks for checking this out. If anything about it trips your fancy, please like, subscribe, and share.
Yes, yes.
Without further ado, no matter how validating and gratifying, this is not a great time for high praise from an exceedingly sexy young lady. Not if excitement is to be kept at controllable levels. Not when she's going to town on his appendage with a gusto that begs for a spectacular climax, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you just sing the song.
Come slugger.
Despite her own rather high-end idealistic expectations.
It's only 10 more minutes.
Before the coolest of cool counselors,
You gotta be kidding.
set out to meet his sexually gifted amour, Court made his intentions clear to the others.
Said something about checking out things that go bump in the night.
Dictated by nature since time immemorial, bunny's going to bunny. What Court didn't anticipate was that other things are also out and going bump in the night. The unofficial morality enforcement is on the scene, and the final judgment was made the second he detected the motorhome shocks, absorbing the rhythm of sinful non-marital lovemaking. Since when an RV's a rockin', you don't go a knockin'. Jason has his own way of capturing their attention.
Where's the hell? Court, you did it already.
It would seem he took her request to heart, meaning the song ending, even if that came down to it cutting out unexpectedly, was like triggering a Pavlovian response he had no control over.
Oh, wasn't that the end of the song? Great.
Great.
Perhaps used to men disappointing her, she's over it, off to investigate the issue.
This thing is burned out.
For one thing, they'd be trapped out there, but that's not her concern, even though it would be the most immediate one.
Freaking horse is gonna have my butt.
Who's horse?
My freaking stepfather in asshole residence.
That's why you don't sneak away with an RV sans permission to go hook up comfortably in the middle of the woods. All things considered, I suppose it's worth the risk.
How'd that happen?
What?
Well, clearly there needs to be a reason for someone to go out into the dangerous darkness and possibly get hacked to pieces by the local legend.
Will you go out and plug the cord back in?
Who unplugged the cord?
Smokey the freaking bear. I don't know. Just go do it.
Court, filled with enough post-nut clarity to object to being a human decoy, puts up a fuss.
Do you know how cold it is out there?
I don't give a shit, Court. Go do it.
Not one bit pleased with this turn of events.
You're a real pain in the ass.
He makes his aggravation known. Had she waited 10 minutes until he was horny again, she would have been able to avoid this pointedly directed flack.
Means you're a pain in the ass.
Will you hurry up? I gotta get this back before Horace finds out he took it.
That's not passive-aggressive, that's just aggressive-aggressive. It would seem their dynamic is a bit on the toxic side.
Hurry up!
Since it was decided in primordial times, before civilization offered a general measure of safety, that men need always be cannon, or if you will, machete fodder, on behalf of protecting the women, no matter his protests, he's beholden by thousands of years of history to be the one who goes out into the night.
All right. I'm going, okay?
Even if it takes prodding. Best or not, Nikki, having been denied, has no problem throwing him out into the void.
Shut the hell up.
Props to him for actually going out there by himself. He exhibits the kind of trepidation that shows he's on some level quite terrified. What level is that? The topmost one, probably because he just got off and feels extra vulnerable both emotionally and physically. When he discovers the source of the problem, he finds indisputable justification for his fear. All of this has in no way led to him being extra jumpy.
What are you doing?
Heart in his throat and balls in his stomach, Court shows her what he's discovered.
Look at this.
Seems like they had a parallel scenario to this earlier in their relationship, in which he enticed her to look at something else that was aloft.
What happened to it?
The scarring is from an unfortunate incident with a vacuum, okay?
Oh, please don't.
Oh wait, she was referring to the ripped out power cord, of course. Moving on.
I don't know, but I say unless you want to look exactly like it, we make this place a memory right now.
Perhaps speculating about what in the woods could be ferocious enough to tear out the wiring like that. She decides it's not worth finding out, and before it's too late races to reconnect with Court.
Nikki, somebody's out there. What if it's that guy Jason?
The misty and layered darkness with the woods as a backdrop, so full of possibilities it's not worth considering.
I don't want to know.
Nikki won't let curiosity compromise their lives. Court jumps behind the wheel, intent on putting a lot of space between them and this freaky hookup spot.
No way. This isn't happening.
Well, that's it. They're stuck and likely done for.
You're right. It isn't.
Nikki makes the worst mistake of her life by not taking the wheel.
Are you gonna drive or not?
Woo! Out of here!
Court hits the gas, and Nikki hits her ass.
Damn it! Court!
With Court operating the massive vehicle with reckless abandon, poor Nikki is left to the will of forces outside her control. Because she will quickly learn what it's like to be the garment surviving the spin cycle. Too caught up in his good time to pay too much attention to her plight. Flung around this way and that, she's come to about the end of her patience, but Court has no trouble ignoring whatever calamity is going on to his rear.
Well, this may be jamming tight for a big truck. It's not bad at all.
Fed up, Nikki demands he relinquish the wheel. But what fun would that be?
That's it! Pull over, I'm driving!
No, wait, I want to rock!
So, he cranks the radio to preserve the good time he's having.
Yeah! Woo!
And jams out while roaring down the road. The sort of disregard for caution on display makes it obvious he has no thought toward nocturnal creatures, other drivers, or even their own safety. Ah, youth.
This is great! I've never driven a house before. I like this. This is great.
But it's evident he's too wrapped up in all the frivolity to notice anything going on around him. Holy moly, Jason was a stowaway the whole time, waiting for the right moment to strike.
Sounds like you're having fun back there. What are you doing? Is it comfy?
Court assumes Nikki is perhaps finishing herself off, since his, well, it wasn't exactly premature ejaculation, so simply his failure to go long enough for her to get her jollies. So he has no idea another man has taken a profound interest in her form and wants to capture part of it for posterity.
Ooh, that sounds great. Do you need some company or what, huh?
Nikki would rather not let Jason carry out his plans, but this is what she's getting for screwing a dude who's a bit of a selfish knucklehead.
This is great. I remember you saying.
Everything coming up cherries for him. Court is beyond thrilled, far too distracted to have a clue what's actually going on in the privy. Or on an RV. Would it be called a head?
This is great.
Okay, RVs have a wet bath, but I couldn't help myself. It happened so quickly. Let's see that again. Talk about getting face planted. That made a perfect mold. Get the plaster of Paris. We can make an exquisite death mask and label it the Eternal Scream. What with him getting laid and all, I'm sure Court will fare fine. Such a fine coach. At least the RV will make it back to the asshole stepfather, right? Right? Well, looks like Jason is personally delivering Nikki's ass to Horace, fricasseed with a side of skewered boyfriend noggin kebab. He definitely got his babka noggined, or something like that. Sometimes what bends and contorts an exit into extraordinary proportions can be an unexpected and mind-blowing image, pun fully intended, because after that, her whole head would be demolished. Back blown out to mind blown. In the realm of Friday the 13th, it all tracks. All things considered, that was probably not how she was hoping her night would be mind-blowing.
Oh, Lord.
Nikki was a fly young lady, one that was a bit naughty, and a tad of a bad influence.
Well, I see how you can make a weak man stupid.
Thank you.
But that wasn't her fault. She had the kind of face that launched 1,000 ships, and that means a lot of undue attention. There's something to be said for the mechanics of the scene, the precision in the lead-up to Nikki's exit, the careful misdirection to keep the audience focused on the idea Jason was out there, out in the woods, and not right here, right inside the RV, was like clockwork. When he popped out and snagged Nikki like a trapdoor spider, seizing an unfortunate mouse, I'm guessing it sent a lot of popcorn flying. With Court blissfully unaware, envisioning some fantasy scenario.
Better come back and start the beat, or vice versa.
Both were all the more vulnerable and subject to Jason's murderous whims. The whole sequence is also tellingly bookended by penetrations. Weirdly, in both cases, Court's brains were scrambled.
If this is as exciting as it gets, we're in big trouble, dude.
Nikki's death happens very quickly, but is so spectacular that it can't help but be memorable. The way her face appears on the side of the RV right there on screen, like the metal vacuum forms around her features, really packs a visual punch for being wildly brutal and sinisterly creative. The whole thing is kind of a wonder. Jason was able to ram her head with such speed, strength, and exactitude, her features were preserved in the metal, without her face being immediately flattened, meaning the perfect amount of exertion was applied to make a pristine capture of her face. It honestly showed a great deal of talent on Jason's part, and what an artisan of death and destruction he really is, hindered not by physics, reality, or any other human inhibition.
Sorry to bother you.
Forget we were ever here.
In this way, Nikki's exit reinforced mightily that Jason, who had already exhibited incredible strength since his resurrection, was straight up verging on superpowered. This arose from writer and director Tom Mcloughlin's desire to craft death sequences that were impossible to mimic by someone with normal human strength, leading to some of the series' most brutal kills.
What do you think?
I think we're dead meat.
When horror films, your knife kill slashers in particular, were getting criticism for creating scenarios children could replicate, this was a smart tactic, and probably contributed to it being the one entry in the series not lambasted by critics, that and an unmatched sense of humor.
Real dead meat.
So, what were you gonna be when you grew up?
Presenting Jason as an undead behemoth roaming the woods and lopping off heads 3 at a time. Made him even scarier and dispelled the notion children could bring these actions to life. But perhaps the neatest trick of all? It reconstituted and transformed him from a relatively human slasher villain with supernatural underpinnings to a full-on, nearly unkillable otherworldly monstrosity, much more in line with the antagonist in a classic monster movie. Come to think of it, that was also probably part of how this film gained wider acceptance. This zombified version of the hockey mask-clad mama's boy is more badass than when he was hampered with a semblance of mortality. This Jason doesn't bleed, and can absorb bullets like nothing, even headshots. Putting his newfound ultra strength and invulnerability to clever use also helps solidify his evolution into this refurbished form by showing he was a whole new Jason, able to make mincemeat of victims like never before. A necessary palate cleanser to get the audience over the disappointment of the previous entry. It could have been a great one.
The kid who was axed to death at the woodpile was Roy's son.
But for a twist, nobody wanted.
I guess he used the Jason thing to cover up with.
When people crave the main man, foisting an imposter on the world could only disappoint. But it did make it a no-brainer that the audience was open to whatever contrivance was critical to bringing back the legitimate Jason. For all his new qualities, some aspects of Jason remained true, and that meant that getting it, meant Nikki really had to get it. In the grand scheme, she might have been as much a victim of the time period as Jason. The era demanded that ladies with the sort of decision-making that she demonstrated lose more than the innocence they were too willing to ante up.
Call it overzealousness.
The kind of strict moral code she was subjected to was not only unfair, but unrealistic. Back in the 1980s, as always, sex was a hot-button issue, and the unending debate of course steeped into the day's pop culture zeitgeist. Ultimately a ridiculous reflection of the fears of the time, panic that sprang from shifting moral standards when it came to sex, premarital relations, and how all that would affect the children. The more casual approach to intimacy was a terrifying notion to the family values above all else crowd, who felt that with every frivolous or random roll in the hay sack or behind the local come and go, the foundations of society were being dissolved.
And then you can go buy some wax for your cross.
And perhaps in some ways they had a point, but the problem is, getting up on a soapbox and moralizing about how the sex lives of others was somehow the devil's work, likely put off more than it brought in, and when applied to a movie like this, just seemed absurd.
Blasphemer!
Sex equaling death is such a funny function of the slasher subgenre, making these exploitative flicks some of the most morally upstanding of films. Since if a little doing and getting done can lead to a gory undoing as some sort of divine retribution, that's a pretty rigid moral guideline. This particular slasher trope springs from a misunderstanding of intent. Equating sex to death was not John Carpenter's objective, when he allowed seemingly virtuous Laurie Strode to survive Halloween. It amounted to girls with boyfriends tend to be too distracted to pay attention to what's going on around them, when commingling and other socializing is taking up their thought processes. Friday the 13th, an acknowledged ripoff of Halloween, took it to the nth degree by making sex paramount in the creation of the initial killer, and the son she was avenging.
The counselors weren't paying any attention. They were making love while that young boy drowned.
So it's understandable that sex is very triggering to Jason. Mrs. Voorhees' whole crusade was against negligent counselors who might cost children their lives. So she sabotaged the camp, and when that didn't work, began killing.
We weren't doing anything, we were just messing up.
When Crazy Ralph proclaimed,
"It's got a death curse,"
he was talking about Mrs. Voorhees herself and her progeny. No matter why it happened, Jason's drowning was an unintentional accident.
You see, Jason was my son.
What they did was a misguided, coordinated assault on personal choice. Apparently, the death curse was meant to extend the possible perils of sex beyond STDs, unwanted pregnancy, and regrettable liaisons to flashy cinematic deaths. Bearing all this in mind, it's no wonder that whenever Jason encounters lovers, especially those engaged in the act, he will also act, and act aggressively. In reality, circumstances aside, there's nothing wrong with looking for a little orgasmic bliss. Bunny's going to bunny after all. Something the Puritans in society refute, as if it's all to blame on media and bad influences, and not nature and proclivity. What's worse, and really driving home the consequences of bad decisions, first Jason denied her completion by pulling the plug. See a double entendre in that if you must. And then showed what can happen when you go off in the woods to get your brains fucked out.
I don't have time for these shenanigans.
Since Court was a counselor and he left his co-counselors at loose ends to service his desires, as a neglectful fornicator, he was primed for Jason's brand of retribution. Nikki might have avoided it altogether had she skipped what turned out to be a disappointing tryst anyway. Guilt by association bad enough. On top of drawing Court out, and giving him some, Nikki took the bull by the horn, so to speak, taking the lead in the horizontal bop, while her lover struggled to keep up with her fervor and gumption. In so doing, she signed her own death warrant, guilty of overwhelming pulchritude, lasciviousness, and prurience. The sex leads to death trope is so glaring in this instance that it's obvious that as the only female character to get laid in the film, Nikki not only had to lose her life, but also something else important to her. In this case, what some might call her moneymaker, or what I would call her outward identity, the face she presented to the world. Jason was always merciless, but here he seemed particularly so, manhandling her into position before delivering the death blow by driving her kisser right into that RV wall. What does it say that he so pointedly smashed her face? An eye-catching looker that turned heads. Appearance was one of the tools she used to attract a sexual partner, of course, so he had to make sure to leave her ugly.
What? No!
And by Jason's way of thinking, what was the best way to accomplish this? Duplicating the effects of a high-speed head-on collision.
Oh, what monster could have done this?
Blessed with a beautiful face, it probably got her places, gained her attention, accolades, and opportunity, and drew Court and other gentlemen callers like flies to honey. And in the end, if this were real, an unlucky coroner would have probably had to spoon out pulpy chunks of her head, mashed into what was a near-perfect mold of her captured features, before the RV landing on its side, crush it back to a flattened state. Although, if you pay attention and want to be anal about it, no one had the foresight to make sure the RV used for the stunt included the face imprint. No matter. If not a cremation, it would definitely need to be a closed casket. You can't have the lid open when a Tupperware container represents a person's head.
Whatever you say. It's good, Cat.
All things considered, that death mask of her face honestly should have been mass-produced and sold around Halloween as a Jell-O mold. Some nice cherry or strawberry gelatin, and you'd have a nifty red screaming face for the table centerpiece. That would be pretty cool. For adult-themed parties, a little whipped cream, and you could make it very suggestive, too.
Yep, that stands up to scrutiny.
Maybe less a warning about premarital sex than one about not taking a big vehicle without permission, because you don't want to stand out so much while providing your killer with a slaughterhouse on wheels, and all while risking pregnancy, grounding, and condom snapback.
If you listen real close later, play that back, you can hear Court removing his rubber.
Nikki and Court might have gotten swept up in passion, instigating the death curse, but they were the ones making a spectacle of their canoodling in the woodlands and on the edge of town. Because of that alone,
they had it coming.
At least to an extremely hell-bent guy like Jason. An insomniac squirrel or a voyeuristic chipmunk could have been watching after all. Or a little feral boy making his way after being resurrected, surviving, getting by, even collecting supplies to build his own little hidden-away shanty. It's kind of funny, because when there's so much established lore to Jason, it's easy to speculate about what kind of events might have gone on during his formative years, during which he was a woodland hermit, and consider unintended hypothetical scenarios that might have shaped his adult actions.
Just because our parents keep telling us that Jason was only a legend doesn't mean it wasn't true.
Jason lives as a rollicking good time, as full of action and thrills as horror and chills. Maybe not quite as dark, gritty, and scary as its forerunners, it still never surprises me when someone says it's their favorite of Jason's exploits.
Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment.
Needed to keep the series chugging along like Zombie Jason, rather than limping along like something best put out of its misery.
And I can think of only one thing, even more terrifying.
What?
Interestingly, it took all the way to the 5th sequel.
Hey, the kids are here.
For Camp Crystal Lake to actually play host to children. Marking it as one of the best camp horror films that actually had resident campers. Whoa, I said one of the best. Sleepaway Camp is probably the best overall. No matter what, it's the only one from the era in which one of the campers was the killer. Although, Jason did technically start out as a camper. Now I'm confused.
Does he think I'm a farthead?
Well, I've about reached the end of the rope, so I won't leave you dangling. Thanks for humoring my ramblings. Please share any refutations, opinions, accusations, japes, or other ideas in the comments below. And please join me for whatever I'm up to next time.
I think I'd rather deal with old Jason.
Bye now.
Bye, creepy man! Keep it creepy!
He's a weird guy.
Goodbye! Hey, Nikki, what are you doing back there? Taking a dump?
That's the juiciest slice. Yeah, not.